in itself is the issue of cyber, really, is that we know that there's something coming, we just don't know what it looks like.
Do you have a team that you can rely on that are going to stay and fight through to the end?
You know, when it comes to fire, you're not thinking what's in the emergency response plan as your very first action. You just know what to do. And I think we need to get to the stage where that's the case with cyber as well, because it's not going to go away.
Hello and welcome to Being Crisis Prepared, the business continuity podcast with Inveroy Crisis Management. And today I am delighted to be joined by Jennifer McLennan from Fifth Ring and by Millie Lowe from SSE Renewables. And I've asked them to join us today, not for their company perspective, but because they attended and, in Jennifer's case, presented at a conference that we hosted with Fifth Ring last week up in Aberdeen called Cyberdeen. And I thought it was useful to be able to reflect on some of the things that we picked up and the key takeaways from the three of us and share that back to those people that perhaps weren't able to attend the conference. And what we're going to do is we are going to pick two each, but we're going to do our first one each, and then we'll do our second one. So you'll hear from, if you like, 6 segments of takeaways from the conference. Jennifer, firstly, let's start with you, as you've joined me on my last podcast. So you're a seasoned veteran now, as this is podcast number 2. What was your first takeaway?
I think maybe unsurprisingly, obviously, given what Fifth Ring does, I'm always interested how people view communications and media. I think it's something that, in my experience, a lot of people have opinions and views on. I think all the speakers touched on it in some way in terms of media engagement. But I think it was important and something that we discussed a lot during the presentation and then in the question and answer session later around about that broader sense of communication and remembering about the broader stakeholders beyond the media. So in terms of your staff as the primary one, you know, you don't want them hearing about any incident via the media, your customers, the supply chain. So really thinking about who you need to be communicating with in the broadest sense. And I think that was an interesting point in the questions and then the networking and discussion parts where we had breaks that people were discussing as well.
And I guess one of the challenges with a cyber incident is that if you leave it till the incident has happened, your ability to communicate with these people and just work out who they are and find their phone numbers and all the rest of it is obviously that bit more difficult because you don't have access to your telephone directories or potentially even your VoIP phones. Everything is down. So how do you find that phone number for that supplier or even your member of staff? So, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed a key part of every presentation was the preparation and testing the preparation, not just thinking you're prepared. I think that was a cornerstone of everyone's discussion points.
Yeah, I think that came through over and over again. I agree with you 100%. That idea of, yes, communications, and second thing that came through was prepare, because I think we started the whole conference off with the idea of it's not if, but when, because of the percentages that people shared at the start of just how many cyber attacks there are across Scotland, small to large companies. So if we assume that it's going to happen, probably gets... And
Network Rail were cyber attacked while we were
on the conference.
So,
yeah.
As an example, yeah.
Professor Phil Wood the first thing he said was, who here has experienced a cyber attack? And everyone was a little bit sheepish and then went, oh, hang on a second. Everybody gets invited to support a Nigerian prince or whatever the latest. And those are forms of cyber attack. As I say, Inveroy has had probably 1 or 2 a month of proper people trying to break into our systems and so on. And we're a company of 20 people. So anyone else that says it doesn't happen is lying or is just blind. So no, really, really powerful first observation there, and one that resonates with every company, large, small, Aberdeen or anywhere else, is get your communications planning sorted. Okay, Millie, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate this is your first podcast, although we've known each other for a few years. So I'm grateful for you accepting that suggestion or us twisting your arm gently to come and join us. What was your first takeaway from the conference?
So I think for me, it was how many people that were there that know how important it is to get cyber right. I think it was a really good networking opportunity for everyone to be able to discuss how they are managing this across their businesses and share best practice about things that we find that are working in our businesses, things that we find that are not working so well, looking for a little bit of advice. In the Q&A session, there was a really healthy discussion on how to get the topic of cyber on the table in these key meetings, in these top management meetings. And a lot of people suggested routes that they've found success with, which I found really beneficial. It was a lot of food for thought for me to take back to the business. I think what it showed me is that we're all in the same boat, really, when it comes to cyber. We're all a little bit new to it. Even if we think that we know what we're doing, there's always going to be an element that we're not going to see coming. I think it was Phil that said the black swan analogy. You know, can anyone think of a black swan? And then there was a little bit of discussion, and there was, well, you can't, because if it was a black swan, you know,
by definition, you
don't know what it is. That's the whole,
yeah.
Exactly. And somebody out loud said COVID, and I was actually thinking COVID as a black swan. And then there was the whole, well, it can't be, because we knew the pandemic was coming. We tested for pandemics. You know, the government had documentation for pandemics. It's not a black swan. So by definition, you know, we're not going to know it's coming. And I think that in itself is the issue of cyber, really, is that we know that there's something coming. We just don't know what it looks like. So we've got to be ready for anything. Which is a challenging thing for business continuity specialists to do.
And I guess the other thing is that, we know it's coming, or the potential threat is there, but what day it's going to come. And I think the example was given of SEPA, that their cyber attack was on Christmas Eve, a few minutes to midnight. Well, yeah, oddly enough, most cyber teams are not at their best at 5 minutes to midnight, and that's exactly why people pick that time to do it, isn't it? It's no surprise. These attackers, every time we prepare a defensive strategy, they find a way around it, and so it's constantly evolving. How it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, might be novel, but the fact it's coming is there. I think I said at the conference that when it comes to safety and therefore perhaps thinking about business continuity and emergency response, we shouldn't really be worrying about IP, and therefore it should be open discussion on what works, what we've seen, how do we share that, so that we all thrive, rather than trying to hold on to, oh no, I've got a way of thinking about this that is so brilliant. No, it's not how we do it.
Absolutely. Like, I think in the Q&A, I had asked if there was any advice that anybody on the panel could give about just the best way to get it on the table. And I think it was actually people in the audience that said, oh, actually, I've done this. I can give you guidance on this. And I just think that really is what business continuity specialists are best at. It's going, look, I've got an idea. I'll share it with you. It might work for you. It might not. Yeah. Like you said, there is no IP with safety, and there is no IP with BC either.
Okay. Well, my first observation was something that Martin Smith, who's the managing director of CyberPrism, shared. And before he was the managing director of CyberPrism, he was a Royal Marine for over 30 years, finishing up as the Commandant General of the Royal Marines, so knows a bit about crisis leadership. And he wove those two together and said that the team that you will have on the day will be new, because although you might have your existing team, it will be supplemented by all the third-party specialists that will be brought in, whether it's the NCSC or Cyber Fraud Centre Scotland or your own specialists for monitoring cyber attacks and so on. All these specialists will come in, and they won't know how you work. And therefore that idea of the new team has to settle in. And I think that idea of forming, storming, norming and performing, that I think it was Tuchman said, you're trying to do all that really quickly because the cyber attack is taking your business down. So you don't have time to form and storm. You have to get to norming and performing really quickly before your business goes bankrupt. So that, I just think, is a useful way of thinking, that you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable when the event happens, because it's going to be different. You're going to have different specialists, and you all need to make it happen. We've all been in exercises where we almost sort of dance through it, almost as though it's choreographed, of this is what this person does and this is what this person does. And then suddenly you've got, oh, who are you? What do you do? Oh, you don't have a tabard. I don't know what your role is. Must be really difficult.
I think in energy sector specifically, there's like you said, with the regulations that are around that, that's a sector that's used to having those roles. I think when it gets out with the energy sector, when we're dealing with different industries who don't have the same expectations of emergency planning, that's certainly where we've seen it in the past, where there's a lot of the storming and the forming at the start. And I think it's something that all sectors, this threat isn't industry specific. It's cross, and I think that was, the audience was very diverse, and that we had as well with charities and the like in there. And I think that that's something that they don't have the business continuity plans, the emergency response plans that the energy sector will have. So I think that's interesting to think about from a cross-sector perspective as well.
Yeah, no, great stuff.
I think one jumps out at me that's very unique for cyber is the fact that usually, like, we're used to dealing with things, say fire, medical incidents, we're used to dealing with things that are very visible. And I think it's very unique dealing with cyber because there's something happening, but it's invisible. Essentially, there's something happening to your business that's risking your business, but you can't see it. And I think the lack of visibility is why it's difficult to deal with, because it's not glaringly obvious like the other risks that we're used to. And I think that by nature means that we're taking specialists in, we're taking expertise in that we wouldn't have on a day-to-day basis. Whereas usually, if we were dealing with an asset fire, we'd be taking in technical specialists that we still work with day to day. That's not so much the case with cyber. We might take in a couple of people from IT that we're familiar with, but otherwise it'll be outsourced IT specialists. And I think that, to me, is why cyber is so unique and why it's so difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and I think a layperson, you're right, you can understand a fire, the trio of things that need to occur in order for you to have a fire and a fire to sustain. So you take one away and the fire goes out. All that, I get it. I can understand that. Whereas, cyber, I'm not completely dim, but it moves at such pace that unless you are a real specialist, then don't even dabble in it because you'll get it wrong or you'll misunderstand something. So it is that, it's a great analogy that you can't see it and therefore you can't sort of get your arms around it to visualize what do I need to do to solve this. Let's move on to our second observations, if that's okay. So, Jennifer, as we started with you the first time round, over to you for the second time. What was your second observation from the conference?
Again, maybe unsurprisingly, but I think the real life examples are always the real impactful moments in these discussions, where I guess there's theory and there's the practical application. And like we've been mentioning, that how do you respond when you can't see it or when you don't know what's coming? I think the examples that the Cyber and Fraud Centre Scotland were able to share, where they've been involved and could openly discuss where they've seen things performed well, where they've seen things that could have been done better, examples where they've been brought in, and the kinds of attacks, for want of a better term, that they've been involved in. I think that's the ones that really resonate with me specifically, and I think the audience from the discussions that were had afterwards. Around the real value that can bring with the real examples. And I know it's so scary, for want of a better term, for businesses to stand up and declare, and and I know some people who do it privately, they're happy to speak to other people who have been victims or share their learnings, but I think that's where the real value comes in, like we were talking about in terms of IP. I think group strength is important in how we learn and adapt and protect our businesses going forward.
Yeah, and I remember Alex, who presented, he used, I think, the phrase that a business had quoted that they were under attack by a cyber criminal, and that using the words of under attack, it suddenly changes the public perception. I think it probably was the Western Isles that he used as that example. We can argue whether it's someone's fault or not, but assuming that they've got all the right procedures in place and they've got multi-factor authentication and all the rest of it, how many businesses do a phishing exercise with their company where they pay a third party to send out a phishing email and see how many people click on it to see whether your learning and training works? Very rarely does it come back as nobody clicks on it. So it's going to happen. And therefore, by using that idea, we are under attack, it brought everyone emotionally to that place. And you go, yeah, actually, that's good phrasing. It may not work every time. And I appreciate, from a communications expert, Jennifer, you might raise an eyebrow about templating it. But it's that coming up with the right words. And if you've listened to a case study, at least then you go, well, actually, that's an option. Whereas if you don't listen to the case studies and you don't go out and read and do your research, you're looking at a blank piece of paper when these things happen, and you haven't got a back pocket full of good examples that you can select from. I really enjoyed some of those, and It would be nice if everyone who had a cyber attack would do a case study and share it publicly. Shareholders and nervousness and probably insurers and all sorts of other people get involved and limit that option. But at least Cyber and Fraud Centre Scotland, they are the holders of that knowledge on behalf of Scotland. So where they are able to, it was great to hear. Millie, your second one. What have you got?
My second highlight, I think it was yourself actually, Matthew, that said it, but there was a really good discussion that came from it. And it was just the concept that for health and safety, we generally all know what we're doing by now, and everything we're doing is trying to improve upon what's already a good base level. So I think the example was we're all ready for fire. You know, we all know what to do when there's a fire. We all know when the fire alarm goes off, you evacuate the building, you use the closest exit, you go to your muster point. There are fire wardens that will check that certain floors are clear before they come out. We'll check all the names on a list. Everybody knows what we're doing when it comes to fire, but we still do fire drills every 6 months just to make sure that everybody really knows what they're doing, which is fantastic. But then you look at cyber, and how often are we doing cyber drills? How often are we shouting through our floors and our offices, we've had a cyber attack, what do we do? And even if we did that, how many people would know what to do? I think it was you, Matthew, that said that there was 2 people in leadership positions in a company that had been asked what they would do. Well, one said, oh, I'd ask my PA. And one said, oh, I would just hit my laptop off the desk. 2 viable options. I'm not sure they're the best option to take, but they're options nonetheless. I think it really highlights that we've come such a long way in health and safety, and I think we're really just at the start of our journey with cyber. So I think in the years to come, I think we'll start treating cyber exactly the same way. We'll start doing these drills where we are shouting out the floors, right, I've just disconnected all power. What are we doing? You know, we just had a cyber attack. What do you do? And I think there were a couple of good points raised by the audience. Even you could have, stickers on lifts where you've got nowhere else to look in the event of a cyber attack. This is the action you need to take. And I think we're really getting to the stage where that kind of thing is what's required to keep it in people's minds. Because even if we did a cyber exercise once a year, you do an exercise, it's the same as doing first aid at work training. It will be really in your mind for maybe a month, unless you keep it up to date. And it's the kind of thing that as time goes on, you just forget about it.
Now, that way of keeping it at the front and centre of people's minds of what to do in that first moment. As you say, the fire equivalent of getting out to muster and accounting for everybody. Once everyone's accounted for, okay, we take a draw breath and we let the fire and rescue service deal with it. Well, okay, what do we do what's our immediate action for a cyber attack? Where is it that it says that so that it's there? Given that this is a topic that's in most companies' top 5 of the risk register. So it's not something that's not, going back to your comments about black swans and so on, it's well known as a risk. And yet we don't talk about what to actually ask our teams to do in the event that the risk materializes. It's just sort of, oh, well, we'll just whisper it quietly and people will learn through osmosis. No, there has to be a plan. And going back to Jennifer's point, that communications early, part of that communications is to get preparedness of if this happens. I think the quote from when Maersk were attacked 5-6 years ago was, I think I picked up that it was something like 8 seconds to respond before the rest of your network is infected. And I'm sure that as technologies improve, that's got quicker, not slower. So, it has to be pretty immediate before it's gone and your whole network is down. And you go, that if only everyone had pulled it out, the immediate action was to dive for the plug socket and pull it out of the wall, or whatever your business's emergency response is. But no, great point.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody knows when you hear the fire alarm, everybody knows, right, get a jacket. If it's nearby, don't take anything with you, leave the building. Everybody knows that's what you've got to do. But when it comes to cyber, you'd be, what's in the emergency response plan? When it comes to fire, you're not thinking what's in the emergency response plan is your very first action. You just know what to do. Yeah. And I think we need to get to the stage where that's the case with cyber as well, because it's not going to go away.
Yeah. No, great point. And just to round it off, my third point was the idea of, and perhaps builds on yours there, is the conditioning of your team for the crisis. And that getting used to being comfortable, as I said before, with being uncomfortable, yeah, sure. But if it's coming, do you have a team that you can rely on that are going to stay and fight through to the end? Or is it going to be, well, actually, we've never done this before, I'm now overstressed and I'm not able to deal with it at the right level? So that training, that exercising to make sure that we actually know what we're doing and that we're match fit. So it probably ties into a little bit with a couple of other things there, but that you are only as good as your team, and therefore having a team that isn't going to go, I can't do this, and leave the building, because you don't have a plan B at that stage. If the person that's on the checklist says, call this person, isn't actually willing or able to lean into the problem. A long time ago, I attended some training that talked about battle shock and the experience from the First World War. And the experience from the First World War, this idea that you have a bank of courage, and that over time in the trenches of the First World War, that bank of courage was eroded and eroded and eroded. So effectively you became overdrawn and people had shell shock. Well, for emergency response, I think you have a bank of goodwill, the management team. And over time, if you abuse that bank of goodwill, it gets eroded and eroded and eroded, and then you become overdrawn. And so that sort of idea of how do you keep, as an emergency response manager, how do you maintain that bank of goodwill so that when the incident happens, people lean into it and are willing to step forward and volunteer for this stressful situation, is one that I think lots of companies could reflect on.
I know a lot of what we talk about now, and anyone who's in oil and gas will be familiar with the PAIR acronym in terms of people, environment, asset and reputation, in terms of the order of prioritisation. A lot of the time now an S is added on to the end, and that's around about sustainability. So sustainability of the team and making sure that you are able to sustain the emergency response to the level, and making sure that's part of any emergency response planning. So I think you're absolutely right. The sustainability of the response has got to be maintained. So making that as part of the preparation as well.
Talking about the bank of goodwill, I think we do sometimes forget that people have got families that are impacted by this as well. I think as well as being grateful to our employees, we do need to be mindful that their families are impacted by asking them to come in and deal with emergencies as well. And I think we need to be careful that we're looking after that as well. Thank you for coming on that Saturday. Really appreciate you've missed your son's football. If you want a day off during the week, his sports day, go to that instead, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we need people to bring their A game. And a cyber attack isn't going to be like the emergency part of a fire, that once the fire's out, the emergency is over. Sweeping generalizations, and any fire experts that are listening to it, please don't shoot me for that description. But a cyber attack is going to go on for some time while they do all the forensic research of what is it that's happened and how do we mitigate that and manage that, etc., etc. It's not 6 hours later we can dust ourselves off and start again tomorrow. This is potentially days and weeks, and therefore how do you manage that stressful situation? And I think that, going back to my Maersk example, I think it was 8 days, and that was arguably fortunate that the way they had one of their servers was down, so they were able to rebuild it, etc. So that's 8 days of a team at full speed managing a situation. Well, that idea of condition your team to be able to deal with that is my second takeaway. Anyway, Jennifer, Millie, thank you so much for joining the podcast this afternoon. Hopefully our listeners will pick something up there from the discussion that we've had, and those that weren't able to join us this time, if Fifth Ring and Inveroy do a future conference, please do look out for it, because we had about 70 people in the room last Thursday, and the only way that we all learn from each other is to get together and brainstorm ideas and share good ideas, as Millie mentioned. But for now, Jennifer, Millie, thank you so much for your time, and I hope the rest of your day is successful.